Hi, I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation and welcome to the Hive. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at these QuinLED Digi-Unno and Digi-Quad LED strip controllers. We'll take a look at the boards, we'll make sure that the WLED firmware is on there, and then we'll fire them up to make sure that they work. So while I roll the intro, why don't you take a moment to subscribe? And if you hit the bell icon, you'll also get notified when I release new videos each week. While you're at it, check out my affiliate links and you can buy some of the gadgets that you've seen in my previous videos, including some LED strips to use with the Digi-Unno and Digi-Quad. And that helps to support the channel, and there's other ways to support the channel, such as signing up for NordVPN or contributing through my Buy Me a Coffee link. With all of that out of the way, let's get started. So a few weeks ago, I was asked my opinion on these boards, and while I'd seen some videos pop up on my feed about them, I'd never looked into them. And to be honest, so far in doing the research for this video, I'm kicking myself that I didn't look into them sooner. Now, these boards are designed with a similar idea to the custom designed PCBs I made for controlling WLED myself. They're designed for working with WLED and LED strips. This custom board that I've made uses an ESP8266 Node MCU dev module. It has a capacitor, it has a MOSFET and a power input, and then terminals to connect to the LED strip. And that's about it. By comparison, the QuinLED Digi-Quad and QuinLED Digi-Unno are a lot more complex. To begin with, they use ESP32 modules, which are a little bit more robust. These boards were designed by Quinn from the YouTube channel intermit.tech. They both feature an ESP32 controller on a board that looks very similar to something like a Wemos D1 Mini in an ESP8266 setup, but obviously the ESP32. And when you order them, you can configure them with an Ethernet port if you want to connect using Ethernet instead of wirelessly. And you can also order them with an acrylic case as well. There's even a variant with an external antenna for wireless to provide better signal. The other great thing with these ESP32 boards that we have on these units, and I'll pop one of them off, and that's also a good thing to mention, is they are removable from the main board. If we look closely at this one here, you'll see that we've got a USB Type-C connection for flashing firmware to the board. Now in this setup, which is the basic configuration of the Digi-Quad and the basic setup of the Digi-Unno, the Digi-Quad costs you $39.50 US, and the Digi-Unno costs you $29.50. Another great thing that I haven't mentioned yet about these boards is that they arrive fully assembled in a proper electronics manufacturing plant. And this is all handled by All PCB, meaning that I didn't need to source any components or even heat up my soldering iron at all to put these together. So let's take a bit more of a look around the boards. So as I mentioned, these are a fair bit more complex than my version of an LED controller. I'll pop my version aside and we'll just focus on the QuinLED modules. If we look at the Digi-Quad, the first thing that really stands out to me at least are these 5 amp fuses here and these massive terminals on the input side. We've also got screw down terminals on the output side, and if we look underneath, we'll see quite a bit more going on here. So looking very closely, we'll see we've got LED 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the name Quad obviously means that this particular unit can control up to 4 LED strips from just the one controller. And we'll see we've got over here on the side a chart showing where we need to connect each one. So if we look closely, we've got LED 1 on GPIO 16, LED 2 on GPIO 3, LED 3 on GPIO 1, LED 4 on GPIO 4. There's also Q1, which I think is for a relay, can be on GPIO 15. Q2 on GPIO 12, Q3 on GPIO 2, and Q4 on GPIO 32. We've got the powered by WLED up in the top left corner and the intermit.tech logo here as well. And that appears to have been, yeah, that's interesting. So that's etched out with copper, and it's picked up some solder from the solder wave. We see here that we've got max continuous power of 10Z. Not sure what that is. So 15 amps or 30 amps there, and max per fuse or terminal is 10 amps. Something else that's interesting to note here is we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 outputs for the positive side, and these are all fused positive output terminals. If we look closer, we've only got 5 fuses, and the reason for that is positive terminals 1, 2 and positive terminals 3 and 4 are actually grouped together through one fuse. And that just means that you can have 2 connections running through the same fuse. So if you've got a strip where you need to put mid-span power injection, this is a great option for those circumstances. And then you have 5, 6 and 7 all on their own individual fuse. You can theoretically still use these for mid-span injection separately, but I would probably start with using some of the bridged terminals there. We've also got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ground terminals there, and the 4 screw down terminals for our LED strips. On this side, we've got our power delivery, and this is where everything starts to look very exciting. So we have these massive protected shielded terminals for the positive and the negative side, and we'll get a closer look at those. We actually need to get under here and kind of leverage up these covers to access the screw down terminals. And there's these here as well, where we've got Q1R for a relay. There's a ground terminal there and a V external. And what we can do with that V external is supply 5 volts from a different power source than our regular power source here. And that will just power the ESP32, allowing us to then have a relay that cuts the positive side of the standard supply. And that relay would then be triggered and won't cut power to the ESP32 because we're supplying that power through this connector here. On the Digi-Unno, it's a fair bit simpler. We still have 4 terminals here, but these 4 terminals are positive, negative. Now, interestingly, this is an Uno, and yet we have LED 1 and LED 2 outputs. So theoretically, we may actually be able to control 2 LED strips with just this one controller. So I'll be interested to test that out. I won't do that in this video. I'll take a closer look at that off camera. On our supply side, we definitely don't have nearly as much in terms of a connector. It's just a much smaller connector, so you could use your cable ferrules or just put cables straight in there. We do have a single 10 amp fuse here and the ESP32 board. I'm going to pull the fuse out and try and pull the ESP32 up so that we can take a closer look and see if there's anything underneath. So there's a couple of dip switches here, and if I take a closer look, so if we're using a 2-channel LED controller, we've got LED 1 is GPIO 16 and LED 2 is GPIO 3, which is also the TX pin on the ESP32 here. So I'm not sure what these dip switches are for. We also see here that it recommends the QuinLED ESP32. Continuous power 15 amps, max power 25 amps, and as with the other one, the input LED voltage is the same as the output LED voltage. And that's the same with the Digi-Quad. It will take between 5 and 24 volts input, and the LED power, the voltage in and voltage out are the same. So another thing to note on the Digi-Unno, which I believe is also present on the Digi-Quad, we'll take a look in a second, is either side of the ESP32, we've got a strip of pins here as well. And if we can see it, it's kind of hard to see here, but this one says one wire next to the pin. And there's one over here that says button. And we've got 3v3 in here. Q4, Q3, it's kind of hard to see other things. So 5 volt ground, 3v3, Q4, Q3, one wire, ground button, 5 volts, 3v3, Q2 and Q1. So those would be other GPIO pins exposed, so that we can connect things like a button, to control it externally. I believe there's also a setting within WLED where you can connect a microphone and do sound activated scenes as well. We take a look at the Digi-Quad, we see those are exposed and screen printed on the top side of the board. On this side it's fairly easy to see, on that side it's all a little bit harder. You would need to remove the ESP32 to be able to get that. We're going to need to remove the ESP32 anyway to get to these terminals. Now, for the purposes of the rest of the video and to keep everything as brief as possible, I'm going to be doing all of my testing only on the Digi-Quad, but for the most part, these concepts should be the same. Now, before we connect this to power and fire it up and check for WLED, I want to hook up some LED strips, and I've got some options here, and we've also got 2 different types, but the important part here is that they're all 5 volt LEDs, and that is important because the input voltage of the power supply needs to be the same as the output voltage into the LED strips, as we saw just a moment ago. So for the purposes of this demo, I have this roughly 30 centimeter 23 LED strip of SK6812s in some aluminium profile that I stole from my 3D printer. I've also got another roughly 30 centimeter, also 23 LED strip of SK6812s, not in aluminium profile, that I will be adding to my 3D printer in the future. I've got a roughly 1.5 meter length of SK6812s with 91 LEDs, and these are left over from putting LED strips on the back of my old Samsung TV. And lastly, for something a little bit different, I have this 21 LED rigid PCB mounted array of WS2812 LEDs. Now, the only thing I've done to prepare these is I've got pigtails on all of them with cables connected, and I've put cable ferrules on the end as well, so that we can very easily connect these into the control board. So I'm going to speed this part up, but I'm going to pop off the ESP32, and then we're going to get these all set up and powered up in a way so that we can test these out. Okay, so I have now hooked up the power and ground and the digital pins to all of these LED strips, and one of my cable ferrules popped off on my little WS2812 PCB, but that's okay. We were able to just get the cable in there and cinch it down. So the next step is going to be to apply power to the input terminals on the input side. Now I have made this little pigtail here with just some big cable ferrules. These are flat slotted terminals, so the cable ferrules aren't actually going to go in there the correct way, but it will work. I have this EC5 connector, which is fairly common in drones, but I've got this EC5 connector on the other end. I've got this EC5 connector going back to a completely ridiculous 300 watt 5 volt power supply at the other end. So we'll get the power hooked up and then we should be able to fire it on. Okay, so I've got the power connections hooked up. The next step is going to be to plug in the EC5 connector, and we should get power to the board and also the LED strips, but the LED strips won't be configured yet. So I will plug this in. And we have power. So we've got power to all of the LED strips. And you might be able to make out there's a little orange LED on the ESP32 board and also on the main controller board as well. Now these boards should come pre-flashed with WLED, so now we're going to test that theory. Now that we've got it powered up, so we should just be able to go over to our Wi-Fi here on our Mac, and we should see WLED-AP. And so if I click on WLED AP, we are connected to the WLED access point. And in a moment, we may get a captive portal pop up. We haven't got the captive portal pop up. That's okay. While we're connected to the WLED AP, we can just navigate to 4.3.2.1 and we get the WLED configuration menu. So if I now go to Wi-Fi settings, and I'm going to put in my network details here. So I'll put in the force, the network password. We'll leave the IP addresses alone. We're going to get a DHCP address. The MDNS address, I'm going to change this to Digi-Quad. So WLED Digi-Quad. And the APSSID and AP password I'm going to leave alone. We can disable Wi-Fi sleep. I'm going to click save and connect. Now it's going to take a moment and it's going to restart the WLED controller on the ESP32. While we're waiting for that to restart, I'm going to open up LAN scan and I'm going to start a LAN scan. I'm going to search for WLED and we see that we have WLED-WLED.local, WLED-bedroom-strip. I'm going to take a stab in the dark and guess that it is this one, 192.168.1.233, and I'm going to copy that IP address, pop back over to my browser, and paste that. And now we have the WLED interface, but because the only thing that we have here that works straight out of the box, as we would expect, is the WS2812s. We're going to need to do some configuration for the SK6812s. We will go to config and we'll go to LED preferences. I'll turn off the brightness limiter and we see we've got LED outputs 1, 2, 3, and 4. For the purposes of the video, what I've done is outputs 1 and 2 are the 223 LED strips of SK6812. So I will choose SK6812 RGBW for output 1 and 2, and output 3 is also SK6812s. That's the 91 LED strip that we've got over here. So I will put strip 3 as SK6812 as well. For the length of these, so the first strip is 23, the second strip is 23, and the third strip is 91. The last strip is WS2812, so I don't need to change that, but there's only 21 LEDs in that strip. So we can also make a segment for each output. So we can do that so that we get separate outputs on each unit. We can do color order override. I'm not going to do that. Button 0 GPIO, button 1 GPIO, 2 and 3. So we can set up 4 different buttons as push buttons in here, but we would need to connect those to GPIO pins and define those pins here. There's also the infrared GPIO pin that we can define here if we want to, and the relay GPIO pin is set to 15, and we could invert that if we needed to, but we would also need a relay pin set up. As I mentioned, that is not default. Let's now save those settings, and we've got green, orange, blue, and green again. So if we go back out to the main screen here, so power off and power on is working, and what we should be able to do is click on segments, and we'll see that we've got 4 different segments here. So I'm going to go to colors, and I'm going to make segment 1, we'll make red, so that is this LED strip here. I'll go back to segments, I'll select segment 2 and go back to colors, and I'll make that blue. And so our strip in the channel here is now blue. Back to segments, we'll go to segment 2, and we'll go to colors, and we'll make that green. It's already green. We'll make that a yellowish color, so that's now yellow. And we'll go back to segments, go to segment 4, and we'll go to effects for this one, and we will make this one rainbow. So that is now doing a rainbow chase effect. So we can have different effects running on different LED strips, and that really just means that we could, if we wanted to, use these as some really interesting festive lights. It would be interesting to see how well these LED strips work with a much longer cable on the digital pin, but everything's working pretty well. Okay, so WLED does come pre-installed on these boards, but if you wanted to flash it with a newer version, if there is a newer version about, you can pop the ESP32 unit off there, connect it with a USB Type-C cable, and go to https://install.wled.me and plug it in, and using ESP tools you'll be able to install version 13.1 of WLED. So really the last thing to do would be to get this into Home Assistant and see how it looks with the 4 different segments. So I'll head over to Home Assistant and we'll go to Settings, we'll go to Devices and Services, and we should, yes we do, we have a WLED instance discovered, so I will configure that and we'll submit it, and I'll just put this in the office for now, and we'll click Finish. So with that instance of WLED set up, we've got it here, it's just called WLED. I'm going to click on Device, and we can see that we've got a master switch, and we've got different segments. So WLED, just straight out, is the first segment, segment 0, segment 1, segment 2, and segment 3 are the other segments. So we can turn each of these segments on and off individually, which is really fantastic. And there's also some configuration items in here, such as our color palette choice. We can see that the firmware is up to date. We can select the intensity, so we can turn that up or down, and that intensity tends to be to do with the width of the colors in certain effects. Live overrides are there. There's a nightlight mode, which means that it will slowly fade out over 60 minutes. We can choose color palettes for each of the different segments as well, and we've also got the intensity of those different segments as well. So if I go to segment 3 intensity and turn that up, we'll see that that's changed the colors that are on here quite significantly, and we can turn that all the way down, and now we've got just one color across the whole panel here. I think that was normally about in the middle. We can also do things like reverse it, change the speed of the effect, so we can slow that right down or turn that right up. There's speed for the primary segment there as well. And we've also got sync, send, and receive as well, which we've discussed in the standalone video for WLED. There's some diagnostic information, including a total LED count, which apparently is 158, which if I check my maths, that will probably work out. We've got firmware, we've got free memory and uptime. We can actually take a look at some of these and look at the advanced settings. Those entities are disabled by default, and we could enable them if we wanted to, and then we could track the WLED free memory, the uptime, things like the BSSIDs and other things on the WLED controllers. So that's the QuinLED Digi-Quad and QuinLED Digi-Unno. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't look into these sooner. Their ability to drive multiple LED strips in a single board is really quite excellent, and they come with an ESP32, which is fantastic, and that helps to facilitate the multi-channel driving. And they've also got built-in logic level shifters, which makes the control of the LED strips far more reliable. I've had a lot of problems with voltage drop with my controller. All in all, I think these boards, both the Quad and the Unno, are about 100 times better than anything I could design myself. The fused outputs are fantastic as well, and the multiple power outputs on the Quad means that handling mid-span injection of power into your LED strips is going to be super easy as well. Now, as far as I can tell, I will say that there's no built-in MOSFET switch here like there is with my version. But there is the provision, as I mentioned before, for an external relay to switch the feed power. But when you're using that, you also need to provide a separate 5-volt supply to keep the ESP32 powered up, because you'll be interrupting the main feed into the control board. That's all we have for this video, and I do hope that it helped you in your home automation journey. Be sure to comment down below with home automation ideas that you'd like to see covered in future videos. And don't forget to follow HiveMind Automation on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up button down below to give it a like. And if you're not already subscribed, please consider changing that now. While you're at it, if you hit the bell icon, you'll also get a notification when I release new videos, and that's normally every week. If you're in the market for a VPN provider, I've placed an affiliate link for NordVPN in the video description as well. I chose to partner with NordVPN because they have the best infrastructure of the VPN providers I looked into. They have a strict no-logs policy, and they have servers all over the globe. As well as that, they've got apps for just about every platform, whether it's desktop or mobile. So no matter what platform you're using, you can protect your personal information while you browse the web, even on unsecured Wi-Fi. So get a VPN today and use my link below to sign up for NordVPN. Lastly, if you enjoy what I do here and you want to help to support the channel, there is a Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description down below. Contributions that you make through the Buy Me a Coffee link are put towards making more and better content for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Stu from HiveMind Automation, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.